Previously on Capital Punishment.
911, what's your emergency, please?
It's 7 p.m. on Friday, January 28th, 2022. Nearly 12 hours after first responders arrived at his home, the Office of the Attorney General released a statement that Wayne Stenjum had died.
The totality of the cost overrun of that building is $1.8 million.
We want to make sure that no one has an opportunity to make an open record request for his emails, especially as he kept everything.
In the final pages of the Montana Investigators Report, the agent in charge writes that a lack of policy or failure to follow policy regarding electronic records and their deletion was significant, and that authority or the perception of individuals with authority requesting deletion by IT raises serious questions about the chain of command in Stenjum's office. Bombshell on March 4th. Attorney General Drew Wrigley met with KFGO News Radio to announce Wayne Stenjum's emails were recovered. Not only were the emails retrieved, but text messages and call logs were gathered from an old cell phone a relative of Stenjum's had brought to the Bureau of Criminal Investigation shortly after his death.
If this was anyone else other than the powerful Wayne Stenjum, the powerful Ray Holmberg, would the general public be asking for more information?
I'm Paul Jerkins, the news director at KFGO, and this is Capital Punishment. The 2,700 pages mostly contain routine exchanges between Stenjum, his staff, and other state officials between December of 2021 and January of 2022. Stenjum died on January 28th of 2022 after suffering cardiac arrest at his Bismarck home. The more than 2,000 emails reviewed by KFGO News were recovered from his personal phone after a Bureau of Criminal Investigation agent discovered a software upgrade that allowed their retrieval. Stenjum's former deputy and his longtime administrative assistant deleted thousands of emails shortly after his death. Stenjum was close friends with the 80-year-old Holmberg, who resigned from the legislature before he was charged in federal court with child sexual assault. He's accused of traveling to the Czech Republic numerous times through an educational exchange program through the North Dakota School Boards Association. Holmberg's trial at U.S. District Court had been scheduled to begin next month, but it has been delayed until September. The emails were released following an open records request from KFGO News.
Thank you, Jergy. Folks, I just want to talk about episode 6 before we completely get rolling on this. Here's the thing. This took a while. I realize it. I mean, we got calls from, quite frankly, thousands of people. We've had thousands of listens. I don't know if you call it views or listens or whatever, but I mean, here's the thing. Capital punishment has worked. And I'm not saying it's worked on behalf of us commercially. What I'm saying is it's worked in terms of getting information out, making sure people know what happened in terms of a timeline. Because I think what's so important is people that are involved in something like this, I mean, that are active in the controversy that came along, they just want it to go away. They just think that time's going to solve it. Well, we haven't allowed that to happen because of capital punishment. So I wanted to hold off on episode 6. I wanted to hold off on purpose. And the reason was because I wanted more information to come out of the Attorney General's office. I wanted those emails to be released so that we could go over them. Well, not all of them have. Just 2,700 pages of them have. And so that's a lot of emails to go through. I realize it, but the staff here at KFGO sat down collectively together and we went through them. And Tyler, I have to tell you, there was some in there, but not that much in there.
There wasn't that silver bullet that I think some people are looking for to say, here it is, a smoking gun. I guess better phrase on this of, all right, this is going to implicate Jason Doctor, a lawmaker that owns a building that the Attorney General is. There's nothing in these batch of emails that is going to have that connection and friendship on full display of Wayne Stenjum and Ray Holmberg. There's nothing in here in this batch that has the Liz Brocker fingerprints that people are expecting in perhaps later batches that we now found out are going to be coming. Like you said, Joel, there's 2,700 pages, a lot of duplicates, but to find out that there is more means that there's going to be more that we need to dive into. in episodes ahead.
And that's what we did find out in my interview with Drew Wrigley. We found out a couple of things. Well, more than a couple of things. We found out, number one, there's more. We found out that Wayne had a private AOL account, and we now are going to have access to that. We found out that it's the opinion of the Attorney General that we have access to the text messages that they have and are in possession that Wayne had. Here, take a listen to my conversation with Attorney General Drew Wrigley.
The 2,000 that we initially, and we at first we thought those were going to be the only ones that we were going to get to. Those have been released. Now I am informed, to answer your question, that there are additional emails that my predecessor appeared to have been conducting state business on his private AOL account at times as well. I want to make clear to people that is legal, but it does not impact the open record nature of those emails. It doesn't transform them at all. You can't have a private server, or you can't use a private email and make that into a private email if it pertains to state business. And we're obligated, and we accept that obligation willingly.
What about it?
That those to be provided.
You're talking about a private email account. You're talking about a private server. What about his text messages?
Text messages, same thing. Where there are requests for open, if someone's conducting state business or having comments pertaining to business, anything of that's covered, those will be provided, and they're being evaluated first by the investigators. It's our BCI investigators have probably done, I don't know, percentage-wise, the majority of a lot of the federal prosecution. Ray Holmberg's been indicted on 2 federal felonies, as your listeners are well aware. And our investigators continue on that work. They've done an enormous amount, and our forensic investigators have been central to that prosecution and continue. So they're evaluating all this newfound evidence, going through that. So we're doing that with an eye toward that federal prosecution. Also, open records, requests by prosecutors for the potential for state investigate. Well, not potential. There are state investigations going on. The possibility of there's a cost overrun. A legislator's been charged with matters pertaining to that. And so those investigators will be going through those, and the defense lawyers as well, of course. And then also, and I want to make this clear to people, we have the open records request from the media, KFGO and others. And that's not some second-tier evaluation. That's a central component of our democracy in North Dakota. We take that seriously. That's one of our most sacred responsibilities in the Attorney General's office. And so we have told the media that we will honor aggressively those open records requests. And we've done so, and we're going to continue to do so. And, for anybody they're saying, well, they're beating a dead horse and nobody cares about this anymore. That's not the inquiry about open records. It's about whether the public has an interest.
Mr. Attorney General, let me ask you this. If there are text messages between your predecessor and Ray Holmberg, is that considered state business? If there's text messages between Wayne Stenjum and Ray Holmberg, is that considered a public document?
The answer is yes. And if there's a need for that to be held back in abeyance for a short period of time because of the federal prosecution or the state prosecution, that will have to be done. But it would just delay. It would not in any way, shape, or form change the fact that those would be open records. The answer is yes.
To me, Tyler, the big question still lies, and everybody can say, gee, see, there's nothing in it. Why did Liz Brocker go there on a weekend and at night and tell people that Wayne kept everything, we have to delete it right away? Why would she do that if there wasn't something in it?
That's $1 million question, because when you have that declaration, ironically, in an email saying, hey, delete all of his emails because he kept everything, well, then people want to know everything. I think that email and that stance from her is what has now put all this weight on the Attorney General's office, put all these questions in the general public. And I think that's why you're hearing more frustration from the public saying, where is everything? and frustration from the current Attorney General and Drew Wrigley from your conversation of the amount of time, staff hours, and resources that are dedicated to go clean up a mess that was pushed upon them by an executive assistant, Liz Brocker, by a former chief deputy in Troy Seibel. I mean, there are so many other pieces to this. Susan Bala comes to mind. The Sadek family comes to mind. All these other cases that this office had all these interactions with, that in this initial batch, we still don't have the everything. We don't have anything in relation to any of these.
Well, and there's a couple of things that are going to happen here in episode 6. You're going to hear, and so you can get a flavor of what the attitude is from the Attorney General's office. Also, the extended conversations with Susan Bala, a woman that went to jail for a year and a half, or roughly a year and a half, and was basically acquitted, or, it was thrown out. And that was actions taken by Wayne Stenjum and, quite frankly, Drew Wrigley. And then you want to talk about another case where somebody's mad and they think that this has been ignored. That's Tammy Sadek and the death of her son on the campus of NDSCS. And so there's all of these people who believe that the communication between them and the Attorney General's office has been ignored, that nobody really got into answering what they wanted talked about. And we haven't seen any of that communication yet, Tyler.
No, the only thing that you just relayed there that we did see just a glimmer of, and it was just an acknowledgement that the Attorney General's office and Wayne Stenjum's office lost the appeal in the Susan Bala case. It's the only reference that I saw into that. Nothing on the Sadek case. There's something else I didn't see much of, except for one instance. I didn't see Peril Grossman, for example, emailing Wayne Stenjum to let him know about any criminal investigations, except for Nicholas DeRozier. And that was an email exchange that did come out in this batch as well. So the questions that we had going into episode 6 here of, okay, who knew what, who's been involved in what, we only have just a scratching of the surface in this initial batch of emails of everything that I think this roadmap that we're trying to set out forth for people. We haven't made much progress in everything that we suspect might be coming.
And if you're just diving into capital punishment on episode 6, Nicholas DeRozier, you got to keep track of all these names and all the players in what we're talking about throughout this controversy. He's the one that has admitted to and been convicted of pedophilia. He's the one that trafficked when it comes to sex crimes. He's the one that Ray Holmberg was communicating with while he sat in Grand Forks County Jail. Nicholas DeRozier was the one that Ray Holmberg put in his vehicle and drove to talk to Wayne Stenjum in Bismarck. And so we didn't see any of that in the email. That came through prosecution. That came through people investigating Ray Holmberg.
Yeah, sharing of the, I believe, Grand Forks Herald article that was just a passing from Peril Grossman. That was the initial contact by early accounts of Nicholas DeRozier, of potentially Ray Holmberg, of that interaction, then getting up to Wayne Stenjum. But back to the point I was trying to make here, I didn't see that being done for any other, I don't dare say a low-level criminal, because of the accusations of the charges brought are anything but low level, but it should be of note that that name that's been such a big character in this story was shared with Wayne Stenjum by Peril Grossman. Nobody else, no other criminal out there was, but he was. Why? Is a question I hope that we get an answer to.
Yeah, and it's one we deserve an answer to. Also, in the emails that we saw in the ones released by Drew Wrigley, this first batch, there was a surgery in December that Liz Brocker is talking to Wayne Stenjum about. And it's actually 2 surgeries that she makes reference to. Now, there was not an autopsy. There was no checking of why Wayne Stenjum died. That autopsy was not done because the Burleigh County Coroner's Office said, you know what, we're going to do an autopsy here. It wasn't done because the Burleigh County State's Attorney, which is now the employer of Liz Brocker, did not, because they have the power to, they did not come forth and say, we are going to do an autopsy here. Now, I have no idea. In fact, I'd like to think that these surgeries had nothing to do with Wayne's death. I just think that that's a point to be made, which is, what was his health like what caused this man to die.
There may be some frustration that, we're getting into the speculation territory here, but that's all we're left with right now. Even after this initial batch comes out, there weren't solid answers. I know there's going to be more that does come out. I'm actually going to be very curious about the text messages and who's been involved with that. And I bring that up because in between episode 5 and now where we're at on episode 6, the revelation of those emails came out. Drew Wrigley joined you on News and Views and talked about the emails, that, yes, they exist. And he closed out your interview, Joel, of saying if anyone's been contacted by authorities or questioned in these matters, they should reach out to the investigators and do it before they reach out to you.
In fact, I would offer up that if anyone associated with this investigation who's been questioned, upon hearing this information, concludes that it might be in their interest to be re-interviewed or to share more broadly with law enforcement, now would be the time.
I had a conversation with Ringstrom DeCray on Afternoons Live, two criminal defense attorneys, about what that meant. And talking about if anyone's been involved in these conversations and weren't upfront, they could be in big legal trouble here. We've got these communications. If you've been a part of this investigation, if you've been questioned in this, it's time to probably reach back out and correct some statements. What do you read into that type of comment as?
I read into that there's a handful of very important people in North Dakota who are terrified at this moment, because they may have allegedly given false statements to a federal agent. And that is one of the main ways. If you can't convict someone of a substantive federal charge, like guilty of fraud or whatever the case may be, you convict them of lying to the FBI. And so will they be able to amend their statements? I don't know. But I think the content of that phone is going to constitute a bombshell.
And I think that there's a lot of concerns about people lying to investigators. And so that's something that I know is going to be followed up in terms of, hey, there was an investigation done. I don't care what level you're at. If you lied to the investigators, you got a problem. There's no question about that. Now, if you take a look at what's happening from here forward, to me, I cannot understand, Tyler, for the life of me, why these emails aren't out now, because there was talk about, it takes time. You know, a whole bunch of the rest of the staff, your producer, Eric, my producer, Abby, and others from the news staff, we were all in one room going through those 2,700 pages, and we got through it in 3 hours? Now, granted, we weren't looking at it in terms of what can be released, what can't be released, but emails that say, hey, Wayne, you got a trip coming up, or hey, Wayne, here's your tickets on Delta. I mean, to throw those away. Right. That isn't part of this investigation.
No, I mean, there was a lot of talk about bakery items, for example, that were included in there, pages upon pages of that. And to his credit, I believe Ed Schaefer and you were having a conversation saying, just release them. And this slow walk, with all the excuses included, I have a lot of listeners of Capital Punishment here questioning why. Why the slow walk? Why are we finding out bits and pieces about how much investigators already have in evidence, or in at least documents and reports, that we're just finding out bits and pieces here and there? We come to find out that Wade Ingett, the state's attorney for Montreal County, reveals that statute of limitations have come into play on any potential state charges here. According to him, that deadline was at the end of February. We found out that these initial batch of emails existed on March 1st.
Well, and you're right, there's two things on there. There's, under the destruction of public records, there is the possibility of a C felony offense there, as well as an A misdemeanor. But the A misdemeanor, you're correct, it's a 2-year statute of limitation. The felony is a 3-year statute of limitations. And in regard to the emails, and I want to make this clear too, this is a matter of destruction of records. So in no way was my review based upon, hey, is it an open record or not under 4404? It's more of did they fail to retain the documents, which then takes us over into, the 446 code. So my references, and there appear to be, a lot of people saying, well, hold it. This is emails are an open record. And again, this is not an open records decision. And it's not an open records violation. I was looking at the destruction, which means they failed to retain. And so I just want to make that clear as well.
I understand why people listening to this are questioning if it's all a coincidence. The group of people get together and saying, oh, you know what, we do have that phone? Or is this intentionally being slow-walked to say, hey, we're being transparent, we're trying to work as quickly as we can, we're also kind of friends here, and we don't want to get people in too much trouble.
Well, and going back to the Wade Ingot case, I interviewed him on air, had conversations, those type of things. He didn't have the power he needed to do the investigation. Very similar to what the investigator out of Montana was given by the Burleigh County State's Attorney's Office, by the Attorney General's office, which is to say, listen, here is subpoena power. You have full authority to go ahead and do your investigation. I mean, we still have to go back to something we talked about earlier in capital punishment, which is you've got an employee of the Burleigh County State's Attorney's Office and the one that's running the Burleigh County State's Attorney's Office that won't speak to the investigator and give the information that they need.
It was an incomplete report because it was obstructed from a state's attorney in the Burleigh County's office that's conflicted. That's been displayed now a couple of times. Ladd Erickson, the state's attorney in McLean County, was given an ethics complaint that you and I had filed against Jason Doctor because, the conflict exists within the Burleigh County State's Attorney's Office. To have that same individual then pass along to Wade Ingot, the state's attorney out of Montreal, here's the Montana report. You can only make a decision based upon what's in this finding. Everybody knew months ago that the report wasn't complete. I mean, the deck was stacked against Wade Ingot.
Yeah.
And we come to find out just about 48 hours past the deadline that his hands were tied, and now it's too late.
Yeah. One of the things I fear the most out of this whole process, Tyler, is the fact that one of the groups, you pointed out that you and I filed a complaint with the North Dakota Ethics Commission. The North Dakota Ethics Commission, I felt, and I think you did to some degree, felt that they were slow walking this whole thing. But in the end, they brought these issues up and said they might be criminal. We need to turn this over to the district attorney's office. And so Julie Lawyer, Burleigh County State's attorney, ends up with the concerns that they have. Next thing you know, where do they go? Well, in the case of Jason Doctor, that goes to Ladd Erickson of McLean County. So Ladd Erickson has that sitting on his desk. We don't know what he's going to do with it yet. We don't know. My argument is that it really doesn't matter if there is a fine. It doesn't matter if it's $400 or $4,000. It's a new day in the legislature. You serve there, I serve there. These people are not going to want on their record some misdemeanor where they profited behind the scenes on state government and were fined for it.
There's two things with what you just said. It is going to be a new day in the legislature because lawmakers are listening to this podcast. Capital punishment.
Oh, you've gotten calls too?
Lawmakers have said, hey, when's the next episode? Because we want to know in the next session if we have to change any laws. I also have a worry that the new day is also going to be retribution against the Ethics Commission for bringing some of this to light, for doing their job. I think that we've seen a pattern out of Bismarck that if you don't go along to get along, we're going to come and make sure somebody is in that spot that will. And they can do this in multiple ways. They can move dollars around. They can cut budgets. They can cut staff. So that's something when we talk about steps going forward throughout this podcast and beyond that I'm going to be watching this next session is, one, do they change any laws to make it a little bit more clear that if you are a lawmaker deciding who's getting what money, any conflict needs to be up front. And number two, whether or not they try to take any action to go after those that brought this to light in the Attorney General's office as of now and the Ethics Commission.
Well, and I would also bring this into the conversation. Mike LaFleur, the majority leader in the North Dakota House, has come out and spoken that Jason Doctor isn't guilty of anything, that he shouldn't be punished for this because the rules are so loose and they haven't been tightened that, you know what, how was he to know kind of an attitude. We served in those chambers. He should have known. I don't believe that the rules are that loose. I'm going to be watching to see if they tighten them, but I think that the rules are hard enough to show that what he did was in violation of the law. No different than what Liz Brocker did and Troy Seibel did, was in clear violation of the law. And so for, the majority leader to say, there really isn't a crime here, he's overstepping his boundaries.
Well, it sounds naive is what it is, because there was a bill introduced a couple of sessions ago to make this abundantly clear. They had the discussion about ownership, about making sure that the public knows who's owning what, and that was introduced by Rick Becker. They had a whole interim committee discussing this. Inside these emails, we saw the Attorney General's conversations about who needs to provide this to this legislative interim committee. That decision and that debate went back and forth, and ultimately you had Senator Burkhardt out of Minot said, this bill's not necessary. We're not going forward with it. Yeah. So to be naive, or at least to have this appearance that, well, this was an innocent mistake, I just don't buy it. They had a whole conversation, that a whole interim to debate whether or not they need to clarify. So they knew that there was some grayness to this, and I think they're taking advantage of it.
And there's a lot of irony in the fact that you've got a legislative interim committee being pushed to find out who owns these properties so that there's full disclosure and openness in regards to whether or not legislators are profiting from this, which we now know were. And yet one of the groups that is sitting there being part of that conversation, the Attorney General's office under the leadership of Wayne Stenjum, is in fact one of the people that Representative Becker wanted to know about. And so, you tell me what type of conversation happens when the Attorney General knows that the former treasurer of his race for governor and a current state legislator who bought the building after he knew he had a contract for the building with the Attorney General's office. Do you really think the Attorney General was going to say, oh, yeah, we're one of those?
Well, and that's why I look at the Legislative Audit and Fiscal Review Committee as well. We've have all these committees that have some fingerprints on this. This report that was provided by Montana was brought to that committee, and it wasn't received well from a lot of the lawmakers on there. Drew Wrigley had to stand in front of that committee for hours, getting drilled, and it seemed as though the individuals that are more angry about the report instead of who was behind the alleged misconduct in the report is something that I think we need to watch very closely going forward as well. Are they just going to say, well, okay, that was a long time ago, people don't care? The hell people don't care. You're getting the calls, I'm getting the calls. We're seeing the text messages come into KFGO. We have to prevent the next Jason Doctors of the legislature to take advantage of their part-time status to take more taxpayer money in the form of a lease, in the form of owning a building that's got a friendly face inside one of the tower buildings to go ahead and own the dang thing.
You don't have to be Einstein to know that it's unethical, though, to sit there and say, all right, there's a contract out that I voted on that was put through the legislature that allows the Attorney General to have a building. And so I'm going to go with my investors and make sure that we have the contract for that building, a man that he knows very well. And so, you know what? We're looking at this building. We don't own it yet, but if we do own it, will you, in fact, lease the building? Okay. Then you overbill it by $1.7 to $2 million. And if all of that hadn't happened, if that hadn't come to light, if the Attorney General hadn't stood in front of that committee that Austin Shower's blasting him away at, if the Attorney General doesn't do that, none of this starts rolling down the hill, Tyler.
No, you're right. It doesn't come forward. I've said before that there has been a tragic fate that's brought this to light. It was an untimely passing of the Attorney General at the time that really splintered out in these webs of other things coming together. It's not just about the building. It's not just about Ray Holmberg. There are other cases that we've alluded to before. I know that you've had contacts with a number of families that, hey, I had something pending in front of that Attorney General's office that was headed by Wayne Stenjum that I fear is all lost in this as well.
Well, and we've spoke to some of those individuals, Tammy Sadek and Susan Bala. And so if you look at the ability to get information as you make your appeal, as you go forth in lawsuits, in the Susan Bala case, you've got an individual that sued the state of North Dakota for false prosecution that the settlement was over $13 million. And so, I think the people of North Dakota are victims when it comes to that. I think the communication in the Bala case is owed and due to the public of North Dakota. In the Sadik case, what you've got is a circumstance where that family continues to believe and continues to talk about this has been investigated about as poorly as you can. They don't feel that their son committed suicide. They don't. So I think it's important that we listen to them. And important that in a conversation like this, we at least take the time to hear them. So let's take a listen to Susan Bala.
On July 22nd, 2021, we wrote under federal law, the provision under federal law, we wrote a letter called a litigation hold letter. And my lawyers wrote that to the Attorney General's office with a very, very, very clear demand under the law that all records are preserved. And it specified emails, faxes, voicemails, phone records, obviously paper documents, electronic documents, but it specified with absolute clarity everything that needed to be preserved, why it needed to be preserved, and that it was under federal law that this demand was being made.
So the Attorney General's office was put on notice on the just in case, or that they might get rid of all the documentation that you're searching for to find out why you went through all of this hell, for lack of a better way of putting it. So basically, you put the Attorney General's office on notice. You can't delete everything. We've got access to those open records.
We do, and by law, we should have.
Strong words by Susan Bala. And I want to make abundantly clear for you listening to Capital Punishment, that interview in full will be available at KFGO.com. Drew Wrigley's full interviews on News and Views will be available at KFGO.com. Same with the Sadik family and Ringstrom DeCray, criminal defense attorneys. All those interviews that you heard parts of will be available following this episode of Capital Punishment. Joel, I mean, there's still a lot of questions when it comes to where things rest. We didn't get a whole lot of answers in this first batch, and part of it is because there's ongoing investigations.
Yes.
We're thinking about names that haven't been held to account. Yeah, I mean, people are wanting charges brought, and there has not been yet. But I keep looking to that U.S. Attorney's Office and saying, okay, where are we at on this?
Right. And the U.S. Attorney's Office was ready to go to court. At the request of the defense, the court date was moved back. And then the U.S. Attorney's Office talks about an ongoing investigation. I mean, I keep asking myself, if you're ready to go to court, aren't you done investigating? And so what is, the U.S. Attorney's Office, headed by Max Schneider and Jennifer Poole, his deputy U.S. attorney, what are they investigating? And I think that's something that the public deserves and gets to know as well. I think it's here, Tyler. We thought we'd be done at 6. We thought episode 6 would tie everything together. We owed it to the people that are dedicated to this podcast, to Capital Punishment, to get this out there, what we have now. And so this is episode 6, and this is what we have now. But more is going to come. More is going to come, and I think, Tyler, we don't have any choice but to at least do a 7.
No, we're going to get this to its conclusion whenever that comes. And I think the frustrations of slow walk is going to continue, but we just ask for patience because, as you started off episode 6 with saying, we want the information for you, but we want accurate information. We don't want to waste time with just getting an episode up to get an episode up. We want to make sure that what is known to us is known to you and that it's accurate. And patience, I guess, is all we can ask for.
Yeah, and I hope that you go back and you listen to the previous episodes, folks, so that you can remember who the players are in this and what the timeline is. Thanks for listening to episode 6 of Capital Punishment. There'll be more.
Why did Ray Holmberg call and leave a message for Attorney General Wayne Stenjum following a federal search of his home? What was said in the voicemail? What, if anything, will the public learn from the next batch of emails discovered on Stenjum's personal computer? Will text messages and call logs that have yet to be released provide more information in the ongoing investigation surrounding the late Attorney General's office? That's next time on Capital Punishment. Capital Punishment is a KFGO News Radio production and is hosted by me, Paul Juergens. Created by Tasha Carvel and Eric Johnson. Written by Tasha Carvel and Tyler Axness. Produced by Eric Johnson and Abby Miller. With contributions from Joel Heitkamp and Tyler Axness.